Hey there, Nicky Hutchison. Welcome to this little segment I'd like to call Before and After. Pretty simple premise. I give you my views and opinions of what I think of something before it's done, and give you my opinion after it's finished. So I'm going to do one on Red Dwarf 11 of all things. So basically my story is that I was one of the lucky people to go and see Red Dwarf 11 when it was filmed back of last year. And again, me and my sister Jade, who was part of the reason I got into Red Dwarf, were lucky enough to go and see it. We saw it on the third week of its recording, so again, what episode I saw would be different from everybody else. And I also want to go into clear that my view and opinions on this are totally non-spoilery. I'm not going to reveal what the premise was or even any of the jokes in terms of, because I want it to be a surprise for most people anyway. I mean, that's part of the fun of it. And to give you my views of how it was seeing it as a live audience as opposed to be seeing it recorded on TV. And the best way of describing it is if you've ever seen Mrs. Brown's Boy, for instance. In fact, recently they showed off the Mrs. Brown's Boy live episode. That's pretty much the best way of describing how the setup was like. Basically, that you have the audience in a row of seats, which is quite far away from the set itself. And you have the cameramen all laid out. They have at least like 6 or 3 different cameras, all filming various shots from different angles. And of course, you have the set with the actors in. And technically, when you see this stuff, you're not ever really seeing the actual show, as in literally you're watching the live performance. A lot of the times, you're sort of watching it on the 3 monitors. There were 3 monitors on the top, so showing the camera feed of what was going on. And a lot of the times, I sort of was doing this thing where you would be doing the two-way thing, as in you kind of want to see what was going on or just watch up the screens. And a lot of times, if you generally wanted to see what was going on the set, you would be doing more like this type of deal. Not because of people in front of you, it would be because the cameramen were all over the front. It was sort of obscuring your view anyway. So I have to find it funny, particularly when you perform in front of a live audience, exactly how far or how intimate do you have. And in this case, it's kind of, you're quite far away, especially with the cameras involved. So there you go, that's how it works. So we saw this back in November at Pinewood Studios, of all places, for the first time. I mean, series, pretty much from series 4 to 10 were all done in Shepperton Studios. So this was, again, a bit of a bizarre changeover, but hey, it didn't really matter. Luckily, my sister was able to come and see it with me because I've always felt like if I was ever going to see Red Dwarf live, I would want my sister, because she's, again, the reason I fell in love with the show, and she's part of the reason why I still enjoy it today. And there's a few little funny stories I have to tell about that in terms of what we did and what happened, but I'll save them for a little later, but I'll get to the basic, what happened in the episode. Like I said, this will not be any spoilers or any real joke reveals or anything like that. It's going to be just the experience of seeing it there and how I felt like it. So I'll get it out of the way. Was it funny? Yes, it was. It was funny. I think people who were very skeptical, especially from the last series, feel that the show is not as top of its game as it was back then. I can definitely say that it is still funny. It is still worth watching. And trust me when I say that most sitcoms, particularly if they've run for this long or continued for, have even had a hiatus like Red Dwarf has, there's always that apprehension of, well, could they still do it? Do they still have it? And trust me when I say the boys still have it. It's the case of, does the episode, what they're doing in the episode is worth watching? And for what I saw, pretty interesting, I'll say that. So the episode we saw was basically all filmed in sequential order, in terms of basically we saw about 80% of it was done in front of us in terms of the genuine stuff that was on the set. It's worth mentioning that the episode we saw, which again I won't reveal, the majority of it took place on the dwarf and bits of it off the ship. I won't give away anything else, but generally if you're wondering what type of episode I saw, it's one that did feature the boys starting on the dwarf, bits on the dwarf, and then getting off the ship and vice versa. So it gives you kind of an idea what type of episode it was. So it's a bit more outgoing than what Series 10 was. Speaking of which, the look of it is particularly different. And I can say some of this stuff since it's been revealed. Most of you know that the Medilab science room is back, and that was arguably the biggest set in the whole thing. And again, when we first saw it for the first time, because when we came in, it was curtains all the way through, and then when it was revealed to us, we were surprised at just how big it was compared to some of the other sets they had in stand. The bunk room is still there from Series 10. It has been redone, and the best way I can describe it is it's less red. I mean, one of my friends actually kept saying that he liked, his only real criticism was he thought Series 10 looked a bit too red. I mean, the interior of the ship, I mean, first of all, it's called Red Dwarf. What do you think they call it that? But a lot of it was more or less red. This time it's less red than before. I can't say how much has been totally changed from the last series. I will say that from what I saw of the bunk room set, it looked bigger than supposed to be the last series, though that in terms of, I think, the rearrangement of some stuff and seeing it for the first time, obviously, because again, when you see it on TV, you don't really have that real idea of how big it is as a set until you've actually physically seen it. And if you're literally there, you see it on TV, you're obviously going to get different shots of it, and obviously it'll be just sort of one big, it's like stage area essentially. But essentially, it is just a little bit of a stage for the rest of the set. What else? Most of the other plays look pretty good. I will say that hopefully more money's gone into this than last series. I mean, as you know, Doug Naylor has already told the story about practically how, had all this shit, and at one point the series was lost at one point. So I will say that I do think a lot more money's been put into this in certain areas. But essentially, it looks okay. Some of the stuff that was meant to be visual effects weren't done, obviously. There were certain things they had to do, obviously, for, say, you have to stand still while we do this shot, blah, 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 type deal. So obviously, we can't tell how good or bad some of those effects are going to be. Though we did have one or two little squibs, basically tiny explosions going on, so I can say that. There is some explosions in this. Not too much, but again, wait and see. But yeah, ultimately, it looked fine enough. I mean, I definitely say that, again, the Medilab of all things is arguably the best looking set, the best part of the set, and I just can't wait to see it all finished and done with. So what about the cast? I will say this, that basically pretty much all of them are on form. I will point out that one of them did have a lot to do. The episode we saw in mind had a lot to do for that episode, and trust me when I say, God bless him, is that he had to do a lot for that episode, and undoubtedly stumbling over lines and various things and having to do scenes over and over again, because that's one thing it's worth mentioning about sitcoms, is that basically when you see it finished, oftentimes you see one scene of a character's dialogue or introduction or them leaving the room. Sometimes you have to do that like 3 or 4 or 5 times. And particularly for Red Dwarf, we had a lot of watching the same thing over and over again. So when we first saw, say, a gag the first time, it would be really, really funny. But then by the time we saw it like 3 or 4 times, the laughter would be muted down because we know what was coming. But that said, that proved that at least it was still funny. We were still laughing at whatever the hell was going to happen. But like I said, Robert, the cast in general, getting back on track. The cast in general, Craig, for instance, was on form. Chris was solid. Danny just did his own thing. Robert, of course, having to be a guy dressed in an outfit with a rubber mask, did what he does normally best. I would generally say that the cast did good. I will say the standouts were arguably Chris. Sorry, no, actually not Chris. Craig. Arguably the standout was Craig at the most part, because he did a lot of times where you would have to redo scenes. And at one point particularly, when there was a shot that involved them having to do an effects shot, we had to do this film one scene and then another bit afterwards. He actually did say, "Are we done? I think that's okay. We got it in the can." It's like, and the others were like, "Did we do it?" It's like, "Oh yeah, we did." It's like, and he was right. See, Craig's professional. And of course, Robert, like I said, is when you see him doing his stuff in an outfit, which again is always real. I mean, Chris and Danny were just doing what they normally do best, and there's no sense of anything they've gotten worse. But I will say that it is funny seeing them now as they are. They do look a little different. I will say the general outlook of the characters in terms of what they look, some of the outfits are different. Like, for instance, Lister's got a slightly different outfit on, particularly when the episode begins. Lister and Rimmer have something a little different about them, but generally, most of the episode, they look arguably what they've done before. Danny, of course, the cat, looks like the same suit. And the other things worth mentioning is about Robert. You probably heard the whole big old deal about, Kryten's mask and everybody going a bit ooh-ha, ooh, it looks a bit weird and stuff, but there's no point of he sitting here and arguing about, because again, it's like I said, every series of Kryten's mask is always different. And I will say this, having seen it live, and actually when you see it, the face performing, essentially, you will say you generally just forget about what it actually looks like. And I will say that really basing it on a still image compared to seeing him perform, it really doesn't matter. I will say it looks generally better than Series 10. I know some people thought the last Series 1 was a bit odd and his nose was a bit flatter. I also know, like, one thing, which was probably a gag in the first place, was he had bags under his eyes, which, again, I wouldn't be surprised if that was a joke in saying, oh, even mechanoids can grow into middle age, so who knows. I will say his body's definitely different, which is, when I first saw it, the only thing I thought was odd was his body's different, but that's expected. I will say the only thing I found was odd was his hands. If you, like I said, you'll probably see it better when the show's on, but his hands looked a bit inflated. Like, his gloves looked like they were a little bit, like they got a bit of air in them, but whatever, it's a minor thing. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to ruin the show. All I can say is that, overall, they look good. You know, really, Kryten's mask, like I said, wait till you see it. Really, just wait until the show comes on. You'll forgive it once you've seen it in action. So I want to talk quickly about how the episode was actually filmed. Like I said, this was all done in story order, so essentially we saw the beginning, middle, and the end, and I would say 80% of it was done in front of us, and 20% was all filmed. So essentially we would see them go through the routine and stuff, and then we would go to VT, which would be a scene they shot on location. They actually had the chance to film on location, and some of it does look pretty good. I can't reveal what happens in them or what jokes involved in them, but like I said, a lot more outgoing in this series, so you can definitely say that we're not just stuck on the dwarf all the time long, or we're not just stuck in the studio and the back end of Shepperton, essentially. So they have gone other places. I will say that one thing is worth, like I said, one of the other thing is, in terms of sitcoms, like, what happens is when we were brought in, for instance, we were sitting, obviously the way it worked is that we went in, we all got sat down, and we had a warm-up guy, and the warm-up guy would come up, and I can't remember his name at the minute, but maybe it'll come back to me when I edit this. But essentially, the warm-up guy's job is, of course, to make the audience laugh, get them relaxed and ready for the show. And particularly when a scene was done, when they had to restart things, or basically they had to do a complicated shot which involves them doing a certain thing, and they have to set things up. He would come in and try and do a quick joke. Like, a lot of times he would quickly come in, do a gag, and then walk off. In fact, one time he actually came in for, like, oh, I guess this is the break. Well, I can tell you all these jokes. Then suddenly they were like, oh, they're ready to shoot. Right, I'm off. Bye. So that was that. One thing I will say, the best part about it was that there was this sort of weird ongoing competition that he did with the audience, where he had one half of the audience saying "smee" as in "smee," and the other half going "ugh." And this would be like a quiz. This was part of the quiz, so essentially that whoever, whichever side of the audience or whatever individual was picked out of that would win a crew T-shirt from, that was basically GMC, part of the crew. And I will say that if they have that on camera, because get onto it in a minute, but I will say that if anybody had filmed that, and I hope the behind-the-scenes stuff does, I really hope they do have that, because basically half the time, if you just heard it or seen it, it's surprising to hear the audience go "smee" and at that point, it particularly made a joke as like, finally do Red Dwarf as a gig, and what do? I have an audience going "smee" and so. Yeah. Again, great guy. I am aware that he was a replacement for somebody else, but he was very good, and I thought he was funny. So he did a good job of keeping the audience entertained all throughout and making sure that we weren't bored to death while they were setting up stuff. So good job. Now, this being filmed live, obviously there's going to be they're going to slip up, and trust me, there's a lot of stuff they did that is clearly golden for Smeg outs, and I won't reveal any of them, but there's one or two particularly I hope that's in the compilation for like the DVD that comes out later on, because I hope they get it on the disc, because there's some Smeg outs that again work in general. I will tell you this, there's one thing I can tell you. We did get a Chris Berry matron, and particularly I'd like to hope that if that's on the disc, you'll probably hear I actually went like yeah, and actually shouted out yeah, so hopefully that will be on the DVD. But like I said, there's two other scenes in particular where really were noteworthy and Smeg outs, so I'm hoping they're on. Like I said, they did slip up, they did have to redo things a few times, but trust me when I say that when they did, they made a fucking game out of it. Let's be fair. If you give those boys an audience to be in front of, they're going to make the most of it, and trust me, they did. So in general, what do I think of the episode as it is? Overall, I think it was a pretty good episode. In terms of, do I think it will be like a classic of Red Dwarf? I generally don't know. The setup for what we had was good enough, and I think some people will be enjoying it. And in typical Red Dwarf fashion, it takes an idea and it plays it with the characters, and particularly in this case, it does play with the four main guys. in terms of how would the best way of describing it in terms of without telling you what it was. I mean, it's one of if you want a good example of how to describe any of the stuff from Red Dwarf 11, go check out Gazpacho Suit's sort of on-set reports, because they're really good and really well done, so there's a bit of plugging. But back to me. What do I think? Overall, I would say this episode easily feels like something out of Series 10. I mean, arguably, I would say you could replace this with... I'd say the two weaker episodes of Series 10 are probably Dear Dave or Father and Sons. I mean, I know some people like Father and Sons. I mean, I just find Pree is a bit... funny idea, but I thought Prue was a bit of a bitch, That's just, you're kind of in that sense that I get the joke, but it's not really that funny. Also, what the hell was up with her face? I mean, seriously, you could tell, it's funny, if someone told me right afterwards, oh yeah, they had a bit of a grudge over it, I could tell. Not to be insulting, but it's like, really, that's the best thing you could do, just give her some pouty lips and draw on her face. Whatever. I'm not a makeup artist. I'm not in charge of the budget, so you do what you can. But like I said, I didn't think Father and Sons was that funny. Though I'd arguably say that you could keep that, but get rid of Dear Dave, because I do think this episode is a lot more enjoyable than that. And like I said, it definitely feels like it continues from where 10 left off, and particularly it feels like it's going to just expand on what they did. I find it interesting because the episode I saw was done on the third week of recording. So obviously what we saw in terms of when this is going to be out, in terms of how that episode will be shown on TV, no one got a clue. I mean, ideally, you'll be the third episode of the series, though for all I know, it could be the fourth or fifth, depending on what they want to do. And for what I know of course, obviously, for what I've seen of the episode, is only just a small glimpse into what ideally the rest of the series is. Now, if you're expecting me to talk about lots of plot analysis or continuing themes and stuff, there's none of that. It pretty much is just a typical Red Dwarf episode that this happens, and it ends, and, resets to square one, essentially, in that basic terms. But again, it'll be interesting to see what the rest of the series is like. Because like I said, we had hints that supposedly there are the episodes that we do know have been announced in terms of some of the themes, for instance, that Kaczynski may be involved. I think that's still a bit of a up and down area. Again, there's an episode featuring about the cats, so that'd be interesting. The one episode I was hoping this would be, and this was part of my little secret, is in the third week coming in. I was hoping that this episode would be the one where they all turn to Kryten, and I'll make this a quick story. Because a few years ago I met up with Danny, and particularly the story goes that when they were doing 10, he took up Robin Roberts' mask, put it on, spray painted it brown, went into Doug Naylor's office and were like, "Hello, I'm Kryten." And obviously he went from, oh my god. And apparently he said, from looking at his face, he went from, hang on, what if the crew were all Kryten? So essentially, it went from a practical joke to being now an episode possibly in the series. Again, I don't know if it's part 11 or even 12 for all I know. But I was kind of hoping we would see that, but we didn't. But I'm still waiting for that episode. I really want to see the crew turn them to Kryten, because I know particularly Robert is going to love the fact that all three of them had to put the rubber face on. So who knows? We'll probably see that later on. I want to leave this section about the story what happened when we got there. Like I said, I went down on a train to London to meet my sister Jade. We actually stayed in a pub hotel, which was a pub and a hotel, and got a taxi service all the way to Pinewood. And it was surprising to find out how far it was, because we were booked near enough. I thought, oh, maybe we can get a bus or something, but apparently when we got the taxi, it's like, no way, there's no way we can get a one-route bus. We had to take at least 3 different routes just to get there. And finally got to Pinewood, and if you've ever seen Pinewood at all, it's big. I mean, if you've ever seen, documentaries about it, particularly, they filmed James Bond, they filmed Star Wars, all that stuff, that's just the main stage area. In terms of the actual place of Pinewood, the actual physical place, it's huge. I mean, it is a big place, and it's no surprise that Red Dwarf was just filmed in one little area compared to the rest of the whole thing. But anyway, as we got there, the taxi drivers drove us to the front gate, and the guy asked us, what are you here for? I was like, I'm here to drop these 2 off for a Red Dwarf. I was like, oh, okay, alright. So they gave us in, and we drove up to what was the production office, the actual production office where they were filming the episode. And we got up, paid the man, and we walked off, and we went to we ended up walking into the reception area because I felt like, oh, I guess this is where this is going to be. This is where we need to be. And apparently we talked to the receptionist and says, this is where Red Dwarf film is? So, oh no, dear, sorry, you're in the wrong place. This is, you need to be on the other side of the building. So we were driven in through the front entrance, basically no identity. So two people went in with no real ID or anything, or they're like, what you doing? You're part of the crew. Went into the front production office of a television studio and were told that you went the wrong place. There apparently were not the first people to do this, and who knows whether I'm the only one. But as we did so, we were told to sit where the rest of the people were, underneath a tent, just to sit waiting for basically the set to be ready for the audience to be in. And to give you a good example of what happened is that just before we left, Howard Burton, the costume designer for Red Dwarf, actually walked by, and I quickly said hi, and he just said, eh. And that was great. I thought that was great. I met one of the other crew members of Red Dwarf, and that was brilliant. So what are the stories? So yeah, that was probably my best. That's kind of one of the funny little stories we did. Also worth mentioning that, as well as meeting Hal Burton, obviously when we got in to see the episode being filmed, before it all started, where the curtains were all drawn, before we actually got to see everything, Doug Naylor came up and said, hey everyone, great to see you here, please, whatever you do, don't go Twitter crazy on this or anything, Series 10 was good because of that, and I hope we continue with this, and I hope you enjoy the show, so see you later. It was great. I mean, funny, a couple of years ago, me and my sister Jade actually got to meet Rob Grant when he was making the novel Incompetence, I think. I hope that's the right name. Basically, this is back when Robert was doing other novels, and I got to meet him for the first time, and he's got signed my book. I still have it somewhere in the house somewhere. God knows where it is. And like I said, seeing Red Dwarf filmed, I mean, it's one of those things that you never thought you were ever going to do. You're going to see Red Dwarf, you're part of the audience, you're going to see this episode, and figure out you're just going to be part of history now. So that's absolutely amazing. So yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts and opinion. This is all before, and like I said, my outlook of it was very positive. I was happy to see it. I mean, the experience of going to see it live arguably was the highlight, probably more than saying how the episode was. Though again, how it's going to turn out, how it will be edited, how the finished result is going to be, is totally, it's a mystery to me. But all I can say is that I'm definitely interested. I'm very interested to see where the series is going to go. Because like I said, I've only seen one episode, so I can't say the rest of the series is going to be an absolute blinder, because I don't know. It's, everybody who's been to Red Dwarf 11 or 12 all probably went for one night or maybe 2 nights if they were lucky. So for all we know, it's going to be a different kettle of fish in every episode in terms of how the experience goes. But all I can say is that it was great, and I really loved it, and I hope, I really hope that it goes well on the show. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching, and I will return with my after video once it's out in September and give you my thoughts and opinions out there. And also, another plug, if you're interested, I did a little write-up about this after I saw the episode on GettingMeInTime.tv. So you can see it. It's a pretty basic stuff, but not as long as rambling as this video. But you can go check that out, look at some of the people's opinions, and all I can say is that, yeah, 2016 is the year of the boys from the dwarf. So all I can say is that I hope to see you in September. So who knows? Maybe I'll be happy, maybe I'll be angry, who knows. But anyway, bye for now.